We're going to head right into our keynote for the conference. Brandi Morin, I'm so excited to finally meet her. Catherine, I know, has introduced us, and we knew that she'd be perfect for Imagine That. Brandi's an incredible Indigenous rights activist and journalist who just has so much to share about her lived experiences and her expertise in the field. And I personally am so excited to hear from her, and I know a bunch of you are too. So yeah, without any more talking from me, Brandi, you have the floor.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm actually joining you from my hotel room in Eureka, Northern California. I'm on assignment right now for National Geographic, and when I was asked to participate in this amazing conference, I knew that I would be away, but I wanted to make a way to be here with you guys. So I'm sneaking away a little bit from my assignment and coming to you from this fancy hotel room here in California. It's my first time being in California. I got here early on Monday, actually, and we're leaving mid next week. I'm here doing a story on the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Here in the United States, this is a crisis that is highly underreported on. In Canada, it's underreported on as well, but even more so here in Canada, we have had a national inquiry and some acknowledgement and action, has taken place. And here they're quite far behind, although there is a new Secretary of the Interior, whom some of you may have heard of, who has been elected in. Her name is Deborah Haaland, and she's the first Native American person to hold this powerful position here in the United States. And she has vowed to take action on this issue and other issues related to Native Americans and their rights. In Canada, we call ourselves First Nations, Métis, or Inuit peoples, or in general, Indigenous peoples. But here in the United States, they prefer Native American, or to be referred to by their tribal name. So I wanted to step back a bit and, let you guys know a little bit of my background and what it took to get to where I am and to be doing what I'm doing. Because I consider my job as a journalist as a purpose that's ingrained into my identity. And it was something that I had to discover through a lot of different trauma and hardships. But those trauma and hardships have helped me to be a good journalist and helped me to have empathy and to be able to connect to, our people. So I am Cree, Iroquois, and French, and I'm from a nation that was originally west of Edmonton, Alberta, and Treaty 6 territories. It was known as the Michelle First Nation. And in the 1950s, it was corruptly enfranchised. So basically, the government convinced our people one by one to give up their Indian status in exchange for, deals such as, giving them some farming equipment or allowing them the benefits of being an official member of Canadian society, or telling our people that they wouldn't have to send their children to residential school. It was coercion, and it was very corrupt. So our people, lost our land base. And in the 1980s, we started to get our rights back. So, our treaty and Indigenous rights. And my Cookham was a member, and her parents, were a member, and started to get our membership back. And so now we have elected, chiefs and council, and we've been in negotiations with the government to be recognized again, as an official Indian band. So that's where I'm from. And I grew up not very far from those traditional territories. I grew up in Stony Plain, Alberta, just west of Edmonton. Now, my story growing up, I wasn't very connected too much to my Indigenous culture. What I had was I knew about the devastating impacts that colonization had on my family, except at the time growing up, I didn't know that's what it was. I seen the dysfunction, I seen the violence and the addictions, the brokenness. And, I knew about Bannock and a few Cree words and this and that, but that history was kept from us. My Cookham attended residential school, and that wasn't really something that was talked about like many of our families, across Indian country, were displaced growing up, or these experiences were, stifled and kept from us, even from general society. There's a lot of people that didn't know about these atrocities that were taking place. So my Cookham, she would talk about, that's what she called it. She would call it the convent, but I never connected or knew until my late 20s after she had passed. So we were very, very close, and my Cookham died in 2008. At that time, I, was still kind of wandering in my life. I had a really rough upbringing. I was raised in and out of the foster care system. So my family, was broken and dysfunctional, and my mom was overwhelmed by having, 4 children, and my dad was an alcoholic and having him come and go. So I ended up in the foster care system, and I had an experience at 12 years old that impacted my life in a huge way, and also ended up playing a role into the work that I'm doing today and why I'm so passionate about it. So I was 12 years old, and I was in a group home in Edmonton, and I was kind of a kid from the country. I wasn't really streetwise and such, even though I, had grown up, in the system. And I ran away one night with a couple of older girls in the group home. And the idea was to go and party. We wanted to find some alcohol and get drunk and, get stupid and just be free from these 4 walls of confinement and coldness at this group home. So we ran away, and they took me to a high rise in downtown Edmonton. And these girls knew where we were going. I didn't know kind of what was happening. I was just kind of following them. They ended up taking me to this place where there was these older men there, and I ended up being raped by 2 of them and being held against my will for up to a week. I never know exactly how long I was there, because it was like days blurred into each other, and it was dark. The curtains were all closed, and we were shuffled from one apartment to another. Miraculously, I managed to escape. So I just remember being in this apartment and sitting on the floor, and I had my knees up to my chest, and I was trying to divulge a plan to get out. And I was kind of playing, I don't know, I think that's what they call it these days. You hear Stockholders syndrome. So I was trying not to be combative or invite further, violence. So I was being pretty cordial to them and kind of acting like I wanted to be there. And I got access to a telephone, and I called up my Cookham, my grandmother, I didn't tell her what was going on. I just said, "Can I come see you?" And she said, "Yes, of course, my girl, you're welcome." And she didn't really know I was in danger, but of course I know that grandparents always know whether it's said or not, or your loved ones or your parents. So I remember going to one of these men and just being able to convince them to let me go to my grandmother's. And I promised them that I would be back. And I acted like I wanted to be there and like I wanted to be back. And miraculously, they agreed to let me go. And I remember it was nighttime and winter, and one of them drove me because we were on the south side of Edmonton and Mike Hookham lived towards the west. And this one man took me in his car and drove me. And I remember the drive there was terrifying because it was dark, and he was opening the dashboard underneath and showing me a bunch of different knives and implying to me like what would happen to me if I didn't come back. And I remember the whole way there praying and thinking like, I just need to get there. I don't want to die somewhere. And of course, you're 12 years old, you're a kid, and so your imagination is running even wilder. So we finally got to my Cookham's house, and I jumped out and ran. And I ran to her apartment, and she had like a bottom floor apartment that was 2 levels. And I ran inside and shut the door. And I just felt so safe when I got to her house. I didn't tell her what happened. I just remember going there and smelling her home, and being in her comfort. So I stayed there for a couple of days, and then I had to go back to the group home that I ran away from. The other girls were still with those men somewhere, and I later remember reading a newspaper headline that they had been, held hostage and escaped, and I always remember like just being so thankful to have gotten away. But I remember going back to the group home, and I decided to tell a worker what had happened because I was young. I was 12 years old. They had taken my virginity when they raped me. And even though you know it's wrong, when something like that happens to you, you feel guilty and like shameful and like it's your fault. So I had all of those feelings, but I still wanted to tell her that maybe she would care or something would be done. So I told this worker, and she basically nonchalantly, looked at me and said, "Oh, I'm getting an update." She basically looked at me and said, "You shouldn't have run away." And that was that. And I just kind of remember feeling like crumbling inside and feeling like, oh man, she's right. Like it's totally my fault. So I left that there for years and years and years. And I went on to really struggle and get into a lot more trouble. And I was in the Edmonton Young Offenders Center for a while for doing, some petty crime with running around with, other young, lost people is what I call us. I became a single mom at 18, and I was a single mom of 3 children by the time I was 24. And I had always loved writing. I always had diaries around, and I would write song lyrics. And when I was 21, I had the opportunity to work for a small paper in Manitoba, and I just happened to be there because I was dating a man that lived there. And it was in southern Manitoba. And I just decided one day that I wanted to write. And I went in to meet with the editor and introduced myself. And, there's a part of me that's really, kind of wiry and confident in certain ways, determined, I guess would be a better word. And this editor took me under her wing and let me do some writing for her. And I absolutely fell in love with it. But after that, when I moved back home to Alberta, it would be a number of years before I pursue a career in writing and a career in journalism again. So I continued to struggle on and off, for years, and processing different things, from my childhood, and then processing when my cookum died of cancer, I was very, very close with. So when I was about 29, I again decided to return to my passion, which was journalism. I wanted to explore it more. I was doing so much soul searching, and I was like, what do I need to do? What's my purpose? And I did a lot of praying. And I had this thought come to me one day to take my portfolio of writing and to take it into the local editor at my hometown newspaper. And at the time, you have to understand, that was really intimidating for me because I had hardly any experience. I didn't have an education in it. And my self-esteem was really, really crappy. But about a week later, I pulled myself together, dressed up a little bit, and put that portfolio together, and went into the paper in Spruce Grove and asked to meet the editor. I was nervous. I was shaking in my boots, but I was pushing myself because I just felt drawn. I thought, that's what I need to be doing. I had no idea if there was any chance that I could get it. So I met with this editor, and he was around the same age as me. And I showed him my portfolio and talked to him. And I said, oh, by the way, do you have any openings for a reporter here? And he goes, your timing happens to be impeccable because we're looking for a full-time reporter right now. So I knew that thought had come from Creator to inspire me to go and do that. I had to work for that position. So I had to apply and go through, all their channels, but they hired me in between to do this special feature section as a freelancer. I worked my butt off, and I was also a waitress at the time. And so I was doing these multiple different things, and I wanted that so bad. I ended up getting the job, and I was thrilled. So I was working as like a general reporter, getting exposure to a bunch of different beats, like community, like culture, politics, and such. Absolutely loving it, loving meeting people, and just in this creative atmosphere. A little while in, I had been noticing the coverage of Native communities by the mainstream media. And I had been really concerned and appalled by what I was seeing. It was always completely negative and racist. And I really wanted to do something about it. Now, I come from a little town, a little area that is pretty racist. There's mostly white people. There's a lot of tensions historically and currently that exist between the Native communities around and the settler community. So I approached my editor and I said, hey, I want to start writing about our Native people, like the Native community here. And he allowed me to start a weekly column, and we named it Aboriginal Aspects at the time. This was around, 2011 or something, I think somewhere around there. So through that process, I started, meeting Indigenous elders and community leaders and artists, and telling their stories. And it was really transformational, because during that process, I was starting to be drawn back to who I am and my own indigeneity, and reclaiming and rediscovering that. And it was like this fire, it was this wild fire. And so I eventually ended up, a couple of years later, having an opportunity to work with the Aboriginal People's Television Network. And I was like beyond myself when that happened, because at the time that was like the pinnacle of it all, to be able to work for APTN National News. And they brought me to Winnipeg, and I did training and in broadcasting, and lived there for a bit. Had to leave my kids in Alberta. They were a little older by then, and they stayed with family members, but I was determined, to chase down that, that passion and that calling. And that's, I think, why they call it a calling, because I truly felt it was calling me, to do that. And so through that process, I also started to learn about residential schools and the horrors of what happened. And I also began to realize that my family, were survivors of residential schools and of colonialism. And I started to understand why our family was broken, why our family was dysfunctional. And it was more of there was anger, there was relief, and there was pride, because I started to learn and understand who we are and what we've, and the beauty of reclaiming and reconnecting to my heritage as a Cree and Iroquois woman is really, really, really powerful. So I think it was 2016, I was working for APTN at the time. And around then was when the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls was getting off the ground. And there was fighting back and forth in the media between the commissioners of the inquiry and governments and everybody in between. And it was very chaotic. I decided that I wanted to write a op-ed, which is kind of like an opinion piece for APTN, and lend my voice in as a journalist. And it was the first time in, it would have been probably 30 years or however long, at least 30 years, that I had spoken about being a survivor. And my editor allowed me to, and I shared my story for the first time. And I wasn't ready to do that at the time, because what happened afterwards is my mother got really sick and all of a sudden was on life support. And I was really impacted by that and the uprooting of that trauma of, sharing, the rape, that I reacted emotionally and ended up having a mental breakdown. So I had to go through that and heal. And it's taken a lot. It's taken, counseling and prayer and reconnecting, to my culture to get over that trauma. But now I am unbelievably passionate and committed to justice for our people and our women. So being a survivor has driven me to have justice, to help create justice, using my platform as a journalist for our women and our girls who are affected by this genocide. It's an ongoing genocide. And I believe that because I am a survivor, that I need to use my voice in that perspective and uplift their voices and their stories. One thing in the media is that our people often aren't covered, but they're also often aren't humanitized. We're seen as statistics. And I'm working to change that, to give a face and to give humanity to our people, because if there is a name, if there is a face, if there is a story, people relate to stories, then it's harder for them to look away from these injustices that are happening. So one of my other goals, when I started to work my way up as a journalist, I eventually worked with the CBC Indigenous and then became a freelancer. I wanted to be able to bring our stories to the world, because in Canada, our stories are kind of overlooked. There's not a whole lot being done. There is a lot of injustices that our governments are doing and allowing to be done. And so I thought, if we can get these stories out there to the world and the rest of the world knows, maybe, some pressure could be created for these to stop, because people are literally dying over it. So I had the opportunity to start working with Al Jazeera English and the New York Times, and pretty much every major news outlet in Canada, and most recently National Geographic. This is just kind of like my story in a nutshell, but I have come through a crisis of being where I was at and lost, to being kind of like reborn and reclaiming my identity, and using my identity, and using, the trauma and the obstacles of the past into what I'm doing today to help other people. And it took a while. It took, the first 30 years or so of my life to be able to discover, what I need to be doing in my life and my career. And I just want to encourage you to say, like, whatever you're doing in a career or in your life, a lot of people have multiple purposes and multiple talents that they can pursue, and you don't have to be, boxed into one. But for me, mine is journalism and storytelling and reaching and connecting with people through this medium. It's challenging work. It's hard. It's 90% of the time, it's trauma work. But I know that I'm built for that. I can handle it. I know how to process it because of the own things that I, have been through. And so I'm so thankful that I can be there for my community as an Indigenous woman telling Indigenous stories, to be empathetic and truthful, and really passionate, because sometimes you have to fight for these stories. These stories haven't always been taken, and editors don't always believe in these stories or think or feel that they're important enough. So you have to be able to fight for that, and it's okay. I don't mind doing that. So that's where I'm at. I'm in California now. I have a major series coming out with Al Jazeera English that we worked on in February. So we traveled to Wet'suwet'en territories along the Highway of Tears in northern British Columbia, and I'm doing an extensive series on the connection between missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the violence that comes with the extraction industries. And that's going to be coming out right away. We've been planning and prepping it for 6 months. And this one with National Geographic, it's the first time National Geographic, one of the top publications in the world and the top magazine in the world, has ever covered this subject. So it is a big deal and a big responsibility. And I feel really privileged, to be here. So that's a little bit about my story. I would love for any of you to ask some questions about, kind of where you're at, what plans you have, or even like when it comes to figuring out your identity and using the gifts that you have. Yeah. Hi, Abby.
Hi, Brandi. This is the first time hearing your story from me. I know it was so impactful. I mean, I don't really have words. It was beyond. But there are folks in the chat who do have some questions for you. I see one from Pia, and they said, I'm just coming out of a student journalist position, and I'm on the fence about pursuing journalism as a full-time career. And they're wondering if you have any advice go about that.
On the fence. You know what? Yeah, it can be a tough industry, right? You can go and work for a big news media company and kind of be tied down to them, but you got, a guaranteed paycheck and it's comfortable. For me, I had to stop doing that route, but it was good to go and learn, and to get exposure to see where where I wanted to report in, specialize in. But now I prefer being a freelancer because you have that choice. You're your own boss. You can pitch to who you want to pitch, and you can pitch the stories you want to pitch. So if you're on the fence about it, I would look into freelancing for a bit. And, that way, you got a lot more freedom, and just work your way up from there. How does that sound?
Love that. Yeah. Another question in the chat, if you have some time, is, do you ever feel imposter syndrome in the work that you do, and how do you handle that?
So what do you mean? Like, how would that be, imposter syndrome?
I think like feeling like you're undeserving of some of the things that you receive, or maybe feeling like in the spaces that you're in, you're not welcome, or you're not good enough, like, to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that is something also that you have to fight through. Like, I remember meeting a reporter from the New York Times to go work with him several years ago, and I was so nervous. I drove across 2 provinces to go and meet with him and work with him because it was an important topic. It was actually on MMIWG, and I was so intimidated by him because he was like this world traveled kind of, knew it all. And I had to really work up the courage to tell myself that I was meant to be there and that he needed me as well, to do that work. When I start working with like major companies and stuff, even such as like National Geographic, I'm incredibly intimidated and nervous. Absolutely. But then I always tell myself, Brandi, this is not about you. This is about the stories that you're bringing. And you need to think about the families and the people, that you're helping through these stories. And so I try to, shift that a little ways from me.
That's really beautifully said. I think, and we have a couple more minutes. We have another question in the chat. He asked, who inspires you? Take that anyway.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's a lot. Well, there's other reporters that inspire me. Like, you guys must have heard of Connie Walker. She's amazing. She's a Cree journalist that does a lot of work on, more recently, podcasting and MMIWG. Oprah, of course. Oprah has always inspired me since I was a kid. I would religiously watch her. But as a kid, I had no desire or thinking I was going to be a journalist or someone to talk with people and connect with them, like her. And just, my family and my cookum and my history, they inspire me.
Beautiful. One last question, if you have the time. It says, are you able to speak to using your culture to guide your path and your future?
Am I able to speak
to using your culture as like a vehicle path in your future?
It is. It totally is. That is what is guiding me, is reclaiming, that part of what was stifled. It wasn't lost. It was stifled. That is what drives me, is the passion for our people to thrive again and know our languages and freely have our practice our culture and ceremonies. So that it absolutely drives me.
I know it's 4:20. I know you have to head out soon.
I have an interview in another little town close to where I am to drive to. So.
Yeah, no, I know you're super busy. Catherine was telling me Brandi's all over the place doing this huge project in California. just so honored that you were here to speak with us and that we got to hear from you. I know for myself and clearly for other folks, it really resonated, and I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I wish I could see more people. I can't see them, but I wish I
know.
could.
This is the thing about Remo, is you can just see their names, but everyone's watching you. And I know that folks are really excited to hear you speak, and as was I. So yeah, just a huge thank you for myself. I see some claps from participants. I know we're all virtually clapping for you.
Thank you so much. You're beautiful. And thank you for all the work that the YWCA is doing, and supporting BIPOC communities, and just such a privilege to be here. And I'm, like I said, I needed to take the time out to do this today, so it's an honor.
No, truly. I mean, the same feelings for us. It's totally reciprocated. Like they say in the chat, thank you so much for your insight. Truly. I mean, I could repeat it 10 million times. And I know everyone's so appreciative, but yeah, I know you've got some big things going on. I wish you all the best. I'm really excited to read everything that comes out with the work that you've been doing.
Thank you. Hi, Abigail. Thank you, everyone.
See you, Brandi. You can just shut your camera off and you'll be good to go. Okay, y'all. So that was Brandi. I know, I wish she would have stayed for like literally the next hour. I feel like she has so much to share. So for those of you live streaming, also for those of you on Remo, that kind of concludes our first day. I know that I've learned so much, even though I met these folks before. Truly, there's always more to hear from them. And I just feel really lucky that we've all been in a space where we get to learn together and like share our experiences with one another. But yeah, that kind of concludes our first day. Tomorrow morning, we're starting off in our homeroom session, so you'll get to like chat with one another, debrief today, and then tomorrow we've just got 3 more workshops set up for you with some pretty amazing speakers, and I'm really, really excited to hear from them too. But yeah, take some time, go for a walk. We have enough breaks in a minute, so get off a computer if you can, and we'll see you tomorrow morning or afternoon. Bye.